So I'd gone to drop my wife and I was taking a walk in Jayanagar somewhere, and then Ankit Bhati from Ola called up and then he said, "Look, this is what we want to do. Drivers want to call customers. Do you have some APIs using which we can connect the two?" And I was like quite surprised because I was like, "Hey, both of them have their own cell phones, and so why can't they just like talk to each other? And why did you like put an API in the middle and then call the number?" I didn't really, but of course I said, "Yeah, of course we have these APIs." And at that point in time, we hadn't really exposed it because, like I said, I was trying to build India's first public internet contact center. So that was my goal. Although we had these APIs inside, so Ola ended up becoming the first real user of our API platform, and they used it for number masking because privacy was a big deal, and we didn't really know about any of this until they used it. So I jokingly tell people that there was a period of about a year when we were actually making more money out of an Ola ride than Ola itself. So roughly they were doing about 2.2 phone calls per ride because nobody knew how to use this app, some new flashy shiny thing. And people, drivers will call up and say, are you for real, like are you really going to take the ride? And then customers will call up and say, I'm standing here, where are you? And so lots and lots of phone calls, and then so our volume like really skyrocketed, and so we were making about like 2 rupees per ride or something on Ola. And so that was really the starting point for our enterprise journey, or the platform journey.
Dear listeners, before we dive deep into the podcast, let me thank our sponsors, Prime Venture Partners. Prime is the first institutional check in category creating tech startups like Dozy, Mfine, Mygate, Neo. Prime is now investing out of his fourth fund, which is more than $100 million. Today, I have with me Sanjay Swami, managing partner, Prime Ventures. Sanjay, Prime has played a key role in developing the fintech startup ecosystem and the financial services ecosystem in India. Can you elaborate on that role and how does the next few years of fintech look like for India?
So that fintech in India is a never-ending opportunity because people are either unserved, underserved, or poorly served. Whether you're in a small business or whether you're a consumer, there is always a better way of accessing financial services. Three areas that we look at and that keep us still very bullish about the sector. One is just better customer reach, better customer service, better customer experience for laser focused fintech solutions. Second is verticalization of fintech, whether it's for logistics, whether it's for health, education. And the third is infrastructure plays where companies are actually now fintech enabling the incumbents, whether it's a bank or an NBFC. So these are three areas that we are still very, very bullish on. And of course, not to mention the entire Web3 crypto space, which we see is again going to be a huge opportunity here.
So, listeners, let's dive straight into this week's podcast. Today, I have with me someone special, someone who had been dismissed a long while ago, someone who was not considered fundable a long time ago, and today runs one of the most hottest companies in SaaS in India. VCs once said, your company is not fundable. Welcome Shivku, Shivakumar Ganesan, founder, Exotel, to the 100x Entrepreneur podcast. Shivku, so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much for calling me. Pleasure to be chatting with you. I never thought I'll find myself in a podcast, so it's cool that I'm here.
Shivku, before we begin, right, would learn to learn about your background before Exotel. Where were you born, your family, your parents, right? What brought you into entrepreneurship, right? The mindset.
I was born in Chennai, a private company manager, father, housemaker, mother. Studied in some of the best schools in Madras, and I've always been academically oriented. And looking back, I tend to associate most of that to my middle class Tambram societal culture, where academics was highly appreciated, and sports and or in general mediocrity was heavily it was a big no. So whenever I did very well in school and got first rank, everybody was very happy, and when I didn't, then they were not. And I think that automatically put me into a cycle of trying to be as successful as I can and as as much possible in terms of achievements as I can. And I would say that's largely what put me in this, what's the next big thing to achieve sort of a mindset. So from school, I went to Bits and then did very well in Bits. Then I joined Yahoo as a software engineer, did very well there. So the dream run actually changed a little bit for me when I actually wrote GMAT and GRE. For some goddamn reason, I actually didn't do very well with either GRE or GMAT, and so I automatically didn't land up with an MS or an MBA abroad. And so this is really where I think my life story started diverging with some of my other friends. Unfortunately, my dad also passed away around about a time when I had just gotten my US visa and internal transfer to go to the Valley, and so I didn't do that either. So I found myself here. I am going to be in Bangalore, and I was already I was already following blogs from the Valley, reading TechCrunch and those days blogs like Giga Om, reading books about Steve Jobs, reading lots of blogs, and also I was working with Yahoo, so I was quite plugged in with what everybody was up to. Google was just going to go public. So it was a great time to be in engineering, in software, specifically internet. Learned a lot at Yahoo. And I would say that in about 5 years, I became what nowadays we call as full stack developer. By that, I mean, if I had a laptop and 3 months of time, I could churn out a product end to end myself without anybody else. I knew how to do wireframes and design and front end and back end and server and whatever else there was. So that was really the context in which I kind of got myself into entrepreneurship.
And what made you start Exotel? Was Exotel your first company that you started?
No, actually, I had attempted to start multiple times before I actually ended up starting. So there were ideas around creating a navigation device for India. There was a web service that I wanted to create which informs people about what they can see in TV channel. There was going to be a software meter for auto rickshaws. So there were many POCs that I've done in the past, sometimes with friends, but none of them, of course, just from the ideas that I just told you, you could imagine that they're not really going to take off anyway. I didn't know that then, but I pursued them anyway. So I was actually doing a bunch of side projects even then, and I would famously call a bunch of people and try to pitch my idea and try to see if they would join. Of course, none of them did. So I quit Yahoo to start this so-called GPS navigation device product, hardware product that I wanted to build. So for some reasons, we couldn't actually pursue it because I was not really a hardware guy, so I didn't really know how to do some of that. So Flipkart was around the corner, so I went and joined them. This was still very early, but somehow my mind was not, I was not very satisfied. They were doing very well. Of course, they're a great company, but my mind was not really satisfied because I promised myself that I'll do a startup and I quit Yahoo. So I started off with trying to recreate a C2C marketplace, a bazaar where people like you and I can buy and sell things amongst each other. So you could think of it as the new age classifieds business. So that was what I actually started. And in those days, there was the smartphones hasn't been invented yet, so it was still the iPod genre. So voice and SMS were the ways to connect people, and then so I'd actually created like a voice SMS internet interplay where individuals can buy and sell things amongst each other. And so that was actually the seeds of Exotel. So I'm not really from a communication background or a telecom background, so it was my endeavor in trying to scratch my own itch that ended up with the company. So I'm actually Exotel's first customer myself. And that also explains the why Exotel question, because I knew very well the problems faced by business owners and entrepreneurs in trying to put together a communication system, because I actually attempted to do that myself, and I was quite unsuccessful in doing that. And so I don't want any of those guys to go through that problem. So when I did pivot, that became my mantra, that became my goal, is to ensure that people don't go through the same kind of nonsense that I went through when I tried to put together a communication system.
And you graduated in which year from BITS?
2004, computer science.
And 2011 is when you started working on Exotel.
That's right. So 2010, I was working on Rupit, which was my C2C marketplace company, and 2011, I started working on Exotel.
And you quit in your job in Yahoo in 2010.
That's right. So I quit my job and I got married.
Got it. Your wife didn't know that she was on for a roller coaster ride.
She didn't know. She certainly didn't know. But fortunately for me, she loved me enough that she didn't mind either way.
And tell us about the initial years, right? Let's dive deep into the problem that you were trying to solve back in 2011 in Exotel.
Initially, I wanted to put together a communication system, so a phone number in which hundreds of people can call in, and the system would now connect them to other folks, buyers or sellers, and then they can kind of have conversation to do business transactions. So this was like a many to many remote bazaar, if you will, right? All happening on like one phone number. And then it was also there was obviously search involved as well, so people could also send SMSs to this number, and then they can get back SMSs in response, and in which there will be a phone number, and then they can talk to you. So this was actually the original problem statement. There was actually already a company that was doing that in the US called Twilio. So for a long time, when you searched for Twilio in India, you would actually see that the question that I had posted in their consumer forums would turn up as the first link. So I would argue that I was perhaps the first person to ping Twilio and ask them, hey, when are you guys launching in India? And naturally, as you know, it's been about 11 years and they are probably just about launching in India now. So I couldn't have waited for 11 years. So then I just tried to figure out what is it that I need to do to put it all together. So spoke to telcos, bought some hardware, installed some open source software, hooked up a bunch of cell phones through Bluetooth and hacked them to receive and send SMSs from a database, blah blah blah. And then so I had like this laptop, like a Chromebook connected to a server with two three cell phones connected. This was actually like Nokia phones. Wrote some S40 S60 code, and then somehow got something up and running and working. This is really how I got started. So it was a very beg borrow steal kind of a solution that I did. And then a few of my friends would turn up and then ask me, hey, this looks like a cool solution. Can I use this for my company? And then light bulb moment happened. So I figured that many other people also have the same problems that I had. So I had to choose between a company that wasn't really making any money yet, which was my C2C marketplace, B2C idea. And then on the other hand, I had this communication technology API. Nowadays, people call it CPaaS. There was no name for it when I started. So now the industry is called CPaaS, Communication Platform as a Service. So people were willing to pay for it. They wanted APIs using which they can hook up and send SMSs and voice calls and things like that. So it then became a no-brainer. So I chose the one where people were willing to pay for, and so that's what became Exotel eventually.
And how did you find your co-founders?
These were the same set of people with whom I had actually, every time I have a new idea, I'll go and pull people, take them for a cup of coffee and pitch them. So Ishwar was one of them. Siddharth Ramesh is another. So Ishwar and I worked at Yahoo. Sid was my sidey in college. And so they've actually told me no many times before. And maybe because they were feeling guilty that they have told me no so many times, or maybe the idea was a bright idea. When I went to them with Exotel, they actually said, "Hey, this looks like a good idea. I'll come and join." So these were just two of the, I don't know, dozen people that I always fall back upon to go pitch an idea, because these are basically the two of the dozen people that I respected, with whom I've always wanted to spend 8 hours of my working life with. So that's how I got Ishwar and Sid. Vijay was my junior, so he was another star in the making. So eventually he ended up starting Belong and all of that. So Vijay, I found him in a bunch of alumni meets in entrepreneurship events, and found him to be extremely energetic. He was actually responsible for getting one of our first customers, which is Practo. He was actually working in Practo, and then at some point there was nothing for him to do in Practo, and there was a lot for him to do in Exotel, so he came on board.
And tell us about the initial first journey, right? When you started up, you were really like what I can say, right? Shining in the eyes of VCs, right? Bloom reached out to you many times, and that's a story would love to learn, right? How did you and Bloom partner with each other? What was the initial starry phase of the first few years?
So I think yeah, it was quite interesting, because many tech startups were just beginning to form at the point in time, and none of them had any intention of trying to figure out the communication piece, because they had their own problems to solve. And I put together like a drag drop engine, and people could set up their contact center or phone system in like matter of few tens of minutes, and naturally it's a very attractive thing for anybody to see. And so many customers actually quickly lapped it up. We got went to from like zero or one zero customers to about 20-30 customers in like a matter of few months. And that subsequently increased my own self-confidence that we found product market fit. So, and in those days also, first of all, there weren't like lots of entrepreneurs. So it wasn't a thing to start up yet. And many of the angel networks, Blume was perhaps one of the early institutional investors. They were actually quite impressed with what we had done, and so many of those guys were actually interested in investing. I also thought of myself as a good storyteller at that point in time, and so I was able to present myself in a charming way that attracted many of the angel investors to come in and talk. And for a little while, it was a problem of plenty. We had maybe about 3 or 4 term sheets, which is unheard of in those days actually. And I had to choose between them. And there's a little bit of content that Karthik Reddy has written online about. Karthik Reddy from Blume has written online about how the original Shark Tank of India. I was actually a part of that, and then in the side, I actually ended up taking a deal with Bloom, and but the producers of the show were pretty pissed that I had taken it because I was supposed to take it on the show. So we did some jugaad, and then we actually got Karthik as one of the judges, and then the event itself actually happened in Bombay Stock Exchange, and I very fondly remember that. I went and took a photo below the signboard that says Dalal Street, and then I'd be signaling in that photo saying one day, someday, one day, sort of a thing. And that photo is still there with me. And I'm actually quite amazed that after a decade or so, we are actually talking about the possibility of taking the company public in India. And I'm afraid that actually that might come true. And in this sense, I'm quite literally living my dream of 10 years.
And tell us about, right, if you remember which year, which month you signed that term sheet with Bloom. How much did you raise at roughly what valuation at that point in time?
You're asking me very old information. Let me see. So this must have been 2012, sometime in March maybe. So that'll be about a year after I started. I raised about 2.5 crores, little less than 2.5 crores at a 10 crore post money valuation. So they got a chunk. They walked away with almost 25% of the company for little less than $5 million. Of course, these numbers look ridiculous today. The term sheet looked even more ridiculous. The kind of terms and conditions that I had then accepted, looking back, 90% of the term sheet was nonsense. But of course, in those days, there weren't too many people advising us, and there wasn't really a startup community or anything else. But it was lots of mistakes, lots of experiences. But that was the amount. So, and for some reason, I thought raising 2.5 crores was a big deal. I actually threw a large party. There were like some 15 to or 30, 40 people in the company by that point in time. And I thought, wow, I have arrived. Future had different plans for me. But yeah, at that point in time, it looked everything was rosy.
And if you remember, what was the revenue of the company, since you mentioned 30, 40 people were already there in the company?
Few tens of lakhs. I think it was, I think in that year, we would have done about a crore of revenues.
And let's move forward. Right now, the party has happened, fundraise has happened. You were one of the first few founders to be like funded in India at that point in time, right? That day we used to hear a funding news, let's say a few times in a month, maybe.
Now, yeah, it was those days. Like Economic Times was not going to write about funding news, right? So startup funding was not a newspaper story yet, and yeah, it was a very reasonably unique thing to raise money at that point in time. Yeah.
So let's move forward, right? How did you keep on acquiring customers, and what was the point that you would hit roughly between 1 to 2 mil ARR?
So Vijay was actually my co-founder was running marketing, and he actually did some kick-ass work with inbound marketing. I would say that we were generating more leads and converting more leads than practically anyone at that point in time. So, I don't know, we were probably doing about 10 or 15 conversions a month completely inbound using content. Some of these numbers are unheard of, and most of this was SMB. And my goal was to build India's first public cloud contact center, completely from where agents can sit on a browser and start talking and things like that. We were actually continuously adding more customers, hundreds of experiments. We did prepaid, postpaid, 500 rupees for an account, 5,000 rupees for an account. Um, created a customer success team, created an account management team, created an onboard team, scrapped the customer success team, played around with incentives. We've done, you name it, we've done it all. So we've done all kinds of experiments. We landed up in events and this and that. Everything was actually coming along fine. I think we took it all the way up to about 350 odd customers in about a year. One of the difficult moments for me was that we went to the market trying to raise at that point in time, and most of the investors actually turned it down, saying that the SMB market in India is quite shallow. I didn't really have the wherewithal or the frame of reference to be able to claim that India was just the testing bed and we were going to go global eventually. I never really pitched it like a global story. Although looking back, I don't understand why. So I just came back saying that okay, so it looks like there is no SMB market in India, so VCs are not going to fund, so we're kind of screwed. So I'd gone to drop my wife and I was taking a walk in Jayanagar somewhere, and then Ankit Bhati from Ola called up and then he said, look, this is what we want to do. Drivers want to call customers. Do you have some APIs using which we can connect the two? And I was like quite surprised because I was like, hey, both of them have their own cell phones, and so why can't they just like talk to each other, and why did he like put an API in the middle and then call the number? I didn't really, but of course I said, yeah, of course we have these APIs, and at that point in time we hadn't really exposed it because, like I said, I was trying to build India's first public internet contact center. So that was my goal. Although we had these APIs inside, so Ola ended up becoming the first real user of our API platform, and they used it for number masking because privacy was a big deal, and we didn't really know about any of this until they used it. So I jokingly tell people that there was a period of about a year when we were actually making more money out of an Ola ride than Ola itself. So roughly they were doing about 2.2 phone calls per ride because nobody knew how to use this app, some new flashy shiny thing, and people, drivers will call up and say, are you for real? Like, are you really going to take the ride? And then customers will call up and say, I'm standing here. Where are you? And so lots and lots of phone calls, and then so our volume like really skyrocketed, and so we were making about like 2 rupees per ride or something on Ola, and so that was really the starting point for our enterprise journey, or the platform journey. And then one day we were sitting in one of my co-founders' house, and we were all pulling each other hair, saying, "Why the hell is Ola actually paying us so much money, right? So what exactly is the benefit here, right?" And it took a while, but one of my other leadership team members said that it should be for privacy. And later on, of course, now we know that phone number is a very important part of personally identifiable information, and drivers harassing passengers with their phone numbers and all kinds of stuff, right? So ultimately, it looked, at that point in time it didn't, but now we know that Exotel has actually played a pivotal role. We've been the backbone of the evolution of the startup ecosystem in the country because the ability for individuals like you and me to adopt all of these systems without fear, anything, right? Practically any marketplace startup that we currently use comes on the back of the fact that you think that you can use the system, and then after that you can sign off and nobody is going to harass you for that, right? So it becomes a given now, but we actually literally safeguarded 10 to 15% of the country's phone numbers. At that point in time, about 80 to 100 million unique phone numbers we had, from going into the hands of people whom you never really intended to give your number to, and that was a big deal. So for that, I got nominated for Fortune 40 under 40. The same gentleman who actually discovered the reason, so we made him focus on the enterprise platform business. He actually then went and got Uber, and practically we created the what we internally call as the last mile connect market. So the name itself is just so blah, nobody even knows that this is a market, and so we literally identified, created, and dominated a market that I think half the people didn't understand for a good 3 to 4 years after we actually even created and dominated it. So we've actually played a very big role. The only sad part about all of this is that I told you about this term sheet with a bunch of nonsensical terms. One of them was that there'll be a clawback if it hit 500 customers. After about 350 customers, we shifted to enterprises. Naturally, the number of enterprise customers is not as important in enterprise as the revenue itself, right? So we didn't actually hit the numbers, the 500 customers. And when I went to Mumbai Angels and I told them that, hey, look, this is a strategic decision that we've made. We're actually doing better because we are now becoming more enterprise focused than SMB focused. And I demanded that they go ahead with the clawback, but they refused. And till date, I think of that as trust that was broken. I think my own experience on what it means to be an angel investor and what I thought angel investors did unshakably got spoiled because of that event, and that resulted in a whole bunch of other ramifications around my inability to trust the investors, their inability to work with me, and ultimately, I think it was just a lot of wasted time and effort for everyone.
So the initial 2.5 crore term sheet that was put together by Mumbai Angels and Bloom participated in that.
That's right.
I think Bloom is one of the nicest investors in India. If it would have been reversed. They would have let the term sheet. This part would have been completely avoided.
No doubt. I think I also think that Bloom is one of those investors that have really gotten their act sorted in terms of their alignment. They truly do believe that their success depends in the entrepreneur's success, and they align all of their interests to making the entrepreneur succeed. And I hats off to them for that actually. So they are actually one of the few true investors who really are looking out to make the entrepreneur succeed. I think it's a big deal. I mean, it's very simple as an investor, you think that that's got to be like ABCD of investing, but it's not easy to find.
Let's move forward to 2015. Where was the company in 2015? Right, 2015, 2016 time frame. There was a lull in funding at that point in time. Right, people had started to dismiss India as a promising story, which never fructified.
Yeah, I think 2015 was probably still e-commerce was a big deal at that point in time, and I think the food tech was about to take off, and some foreign investors were beginning to come in. I think Tiger was around the corner at that point in time, looking for more investments to do. So it was still through and through a B2C story. And I would argue that Exotel is also actually a B2C internet story. 70%, 80% of our revenues were still coming from on the back of venture capital enabled companies in the B2C space. So we were really supporting Flipkart and Ola, Uber and Swiggy and Zomato and all of these guys. So in many ways, Exotic Story is also actually the Indian consumer internet story, and it played out exactly that way. Around about 2015, 2016 is when I had actually attempted to do another fundraise because we were coming off the back of a really good year. But this time, I think that I failed miserably in conveying the essence of what we stood for as a company. As I told you, my original vision was to build a cloud contact center for emerging markets, but we somehow ended up in an enterprise platform business, which I think I never really wrapped my head around. And so I wasn't really able to convey the story clearly to investors. So investors would now ask me things like, okay, you're doing all of this, you're what next, right? And then, I'd be lost for words. I like, okay, we'll sell more of this to more APIs to more tech-enabled companies to more marketplaces around the world. But I wasn't really able to explain how this is going to be a once in a lifetime company, and I think that's probably why we mostly couldn't raise in the second time as well. So I actually failed. I'm actually now twice failed in terms of trying to raise funds. So that was what it was. In the meantime, one of our competitors, Nolarity, they actually were, at least on paper, having a dream run, which is every 18 months you were raising 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, 40 million, and that's exactly what was going on with Molarity. And so I would argue that my own motivation levels were quite low. My employees, although they were asking me different kinds of questions, in my head, in my mind, it always sounded like they were asking me, how come you're not able to raise any money? so so it was I think somehow I pulled out a coup. I don't know how, but somehow I just kept at it. But now I do think I know how. So what we really had in the company was I created an environment where people could be themselves and enjoy working with each other. And so it was more like a family rather than a sports team. So exactly the opposite of what Netflix says, right? So and what that helped us was to gel really well with each other, and we looked out for each other, and we had fun together. Things were up and down together, but we were all together. So there were a core team of about 15, 20 people during that time that really gelled, and we actually they actually stuck with the company for a really long time. Some of these guys were with me for almost 8, 9 years, and I think that family type tribe-ish sort of work culture really worked out. And so even though nothing really was working for us, I think we were just somehow focused on going and selling to customers, getting them onboarded, and just getting on with life. And we were doing about 40-45% CAGR year on year, profitable. So I think that was one thing that really worked in our favor. The second one is I later realized that I'm actually quite persistent. At that point in time, I didn't think of myself as that. But it looks like one of the strange things about running a 40% growth company is that you can't shut it down and go home because it's still growing. Customers are still buying. You still know that you're adding value. You're even making profit. So why would you just like throw this good-looking business into the dustbin and walk off. So you can't go home. But 40% is also not hockey stick. So it's also not going to become like this, which means it's not really still venture fundable. I wasn't still able to explain why the market size was very big and things like that. So you are probably not also going to go big in the venture capital sense of the word. So I actually ended up with a business that was neither going to go home nor going to go big. And in this sense, I just sat on my ass. My team just sat on their ass, and we just executed, and we kept on executing.
And what was the revenue back then, 2015, 2016, if you can recall?
Must be in the 40 crores to 50 crores sort of a range. So it was nothing non-trivial, nothing trivial. So it was already very meaningful, and it was a company that was worth spending more time on.
And your co-founders left, right? Both the co-founders. So can you describe that feeling and what were the events that led them to leave the company they co-founded along with you?
The first one to leave was Vijay Sharma. So he actually left because back in 2014 we also got into a little bit of a trouble with our licensing. So we were actually quite, like I said, I'm not really from a communications background, so I was supposed to be an internet software person. And it turns out that there is a license that we were supposed to take for the business that we are currently doing, which was, believe it or not, 25,000 rupees, which we hadn't taken, about which we didn't know. And there's literally like no ramifications other than the fact that we have to just go and take this. And For some reason, they decided to come after us, and instead of just suggesting us what to do, how to do this better, and things like that, I think they just, I don't know, I think they had experiences of working with lots of people. In telecom, there is this thing about doing long distance calls over internet, and the kind of siphoning of telco revenues, right? So I think that's the background with which some of these officials were exploring us, and they actually gave us a lot of trouble, which I think was certainly not something that a 26-year-old, 28-year-old software entrepreneur should be put through. And we actually learned how to work with government officials. Many of my team members actually ran from pillar to post, and it was literally like a dramatic set of events where we ensured that they didn't pull down our lines, and then there were some 354 companies that were dependent on our existence, and somehow we saved the company from going down the drains at that point in time. It was just like, there'll be like a couple of people sitting in government offices in Delhi. There'll be one person sitting in telco office in Bangalore. There'll be two people sitting in customers office reassuring them. I think that also brought the team together. I think so. This is the same team that went through all of it, but I think at the end of it, we all became even more strongly knit as a family, and that really went on. So, but this was the circumstances under which my first co-founder left. I think my own credibility as an entrepreneur, as a leader, also was under question. So it was my responsibility to have sorted this out, and I didn't. And I think more than anybody else, I questioned my own capabilities at that point in time. Am I really cut out to be a leader, to build and run a company? So that was co-founder number one. Co-founder number two was a bit more objective. So my CTO then was, I think, more of a architect and less of a people's person, and we had to grow the team size. And I wasn't able to at least coach and mentor him to try to be that person, like a people-oriented leader rather than a technology-oriented leader. So uh, it was it was more of hey, we had to do what we had to do sort of thing, and so we wanted to bring in a people leader sort of a person. So that's really what happened with the co-founder number two. He is still with the company in the sense that he's still sitting on the board, and we're still good friends and stuff. So that was just there was no drama. It was just a mutual decision that I took.
And let's move forward. VCs kept on dismissing the company, right? And after two fundraisers, you literally gave up that this company is not meant to be funded at all, right?
Absolutely. I just said, screw this shit. We'll just build a company, and then that's it.
And how big the team went before the pandemic hit?
Actually, before the pandemic, there was one more series of events that happened. So by this time we were almost 6 7 years into the company, maybe eight. And obviously now some people started asking, so what are we trying to do here? How long are we supposed to keep running like this? And can we now sell the company to someone? And then so that conversation took off a little bit, and then we started chatting randomly with some companies, and then there were about two three companies that were quite interested in buying us out for the assets that we had built. One of them spoke to us, and quite frankly, I think took all the information and recreated the entire stack in India and stole one of our customers. Or at least that's how, from my vantage point, that's how it looks like to me when I look back. And the second one gave us a term sheet. We even went to their annual day celebrations and whatnot, and but I think they kind of called back and gave a few excuses, which didn't seem like unsurmountable reasons for calling a deal off. So that also happened. So if two failed fundraisers was not enough, then we also had one failed acquisition. I was actually beginning to count the money and how I'm going to retire and whatnot. And by now, for example, I would have been retired, and I don't know, maybe my next startup would have started, but none of that really materialized that way. So it was, I think, maybe the fourth big round of hammering that the company got, which demotivated all of us. And then we were really like, I think one of the darkest phases of the company. So I think I would say that there were about four times when somehow the universe conspired to killing the company, but we still didn't die.
And you had shared that with employees that the company is going to get acquired because the term sheet had been signed.
Yeah, yeah. Many of them knew. In fact, the acquiring company had even interviewed a bunch of those folks. Like I said, we even went to their party. We took them out for parties here.
And what, if you remember, what was the revenue back then? Because I'm trying to relate everything to revenue because that I'm treating as a North Star metric to the progress of the company.
Yeah, I think by this time we would have been in the 75 crores range.
Like more than 10 million back then, right? In terms of the dollar. And I believe that acquisition must have been what, above $50 million of cash.
No, it was a $30 million. Okay, so sorry, it was a $30 million acquisition deal, and I think we must have been maybe in the 60 crores range. So it was something like the 4x, 5x sort of a range.
But enough for you and to retire, right? And core team members to get financial freedom.
Yeah, yeah, enough for most of us to retire.
And let's move forward, right? After you were battered, right? This is the fourth time. Uh, did you think of shutting down or like moving on? Because like a person can only bear so much.
I agree with you. I've actually thought of shutting down multiple times. I have also thought of quitting multiple times, at least half a dozen times each. But every single time, I will always come back to the same that I described, right? So the problem is that I had a company that was growing at 40%. Like, what do you do with this company? You can't shut it down, right? So, like, you can't shut down a company with 60 crores of revenue. So, no, I think the way it really worked is that nobody really told me how to quit, if you know what I mean. I think there are lots of yarn about knowledge about how to start. I don't think there is enough knowledge about material about how to quit. Certainly, I didn't come across any. So I just didn't know how to quit. I attempted to leave the company a couple of times. Like nobody was interested in letting me go. They're like, boss, like maybe I can go, but you can't go, right? So I could neither leave nor can I shut down. So I had to turn up. So I did.
And after that, failed acquisition, and you deciding that I want to continue. How did you survive till pandemic? And by till pandemic, you had almost grown to $20 million in ARR, right? From that 60 crores of revenue uh, at the time of acquisition.
Yeah, so I think COVID was also you know in another parallel universe I would have said the company has been hammered five times, and it was actually so the fifth time was COVID. So a lot of our revenues were dependent on things moving on the ground, and logistics, third party logistics, supply chain, cabs, shared mobility. So these were the industries that we were really plugged into, and as you know, because of COVID and the lockdown, all of that really crashed. So our revenues actually crashed by about 55% overnight. And so one of the things about the way I ran the business was that I always knew that there was more to build and more to do. So although we were profitable, I had actually kept the profits to the wire. So our PBT would be like sub 5%. Literally, like we were making profits simply because we had to make a little bit of profits anyway. But I actually funneled all the money back into hiring, into software development and things like that, into sales and marketing and things like that. So just before pandemic, we figured out that I had actually driven it too close, and there was going to be a cash flow issue. So we were spending faster than what we were collecting, and then there was quite a bit of drama and quite a bit of pulling everybody's hair, and then somehow we actually steered the ship and ensured that we didn't crash land, and then we got out of that. And then it was February by the time we had done that, and then in March COVID hit, and we just didn't have a choice but to let go of about 50 people. So with that, I think I have done everything in running a company, including a layoff, which was also a very stressful event for me and for all of us. So, and like I said, this is we were actually running like a tribe and like a family, and it wasn't easy to let some of my colleagues go. But we had to, because there are, in a profitable company, the rule of thumb is that you have to be profitable. That's it, right? So long as you're profitable, you can think about another day tomorrow, and so that was rule number one. And so I had to do what I had to do. So so now, going to about April, May of 2020, we are now down to about maybe 150, 140 people. Our revenues are now down to about 55% of what it used to be. And things were looking quite bleak. And then we just come out of a cash flow issue. I had reduced everybody's salary to 80% of what it was, and I think I reduced the leadership salary to about 40% of what it was. So this is probably also one of the lowest points that you could have found me. Of course, from that point in time, I think the stars aligned.
And then what made the company turn around, right? And also would love to discuss the story how A91 came into the picture.
So the one of the good things that I did was that long before the pandemic, I'd actually reached out to Sachin Bhatia from Ameo, saying that we should merge, and I'd argued with him. So the reason why I started talking to him, because remember, I actually always had this, hey, let's build India's first public cloud contact center vision. And when I asked my team to put together a roadmap to build it, they actually came back with a 2.5 year time frame, and I just didn't have the patience to wait for 2.5 years. I said, screw this. They already have a contact center, so let's just go figure out how to get them in, and we'll put it on top of the cloud, and that's how we are going to bring India's first public cloud contact center. So I'd actually started speaking to him in 2019. I think on paper, Sachin saw the point of it. So we then actually attempted to do a complete stock swap based merger driven by entrepreneurs. I think that would, if I pulled that off, actually that would also been a case study in itself. I don't think anything like that has ever happened, and unfortunately, ours was also not going to happen. And you may be able to guess why that is. We just couldn't get everyone to agree on the valuation, and so we were just not able to agree on the swap ratio, and then that just basically just died. Then briefly we attempted to raise funds with this story, but that also, I mean, like I told you, I was not really interested in talking to venture capitalists anymore. I was like, yeah, screw this. So let's just figure out a way to run this ourselves, sort of thing. So I wasn't really going to go and try to raise funds and stuff. Again, fortunately, I was speaking with Gautam Mago from A91. I bumped into him in Leela. Looks like all good things happened to me at Leela for some reason. I actually caught up with Sajin Bhatia at Leela. I bumped into Mago at Leela. Maybe I should get them on board as investors. So then Leela Palace in Airport Road in Bangalore. So then we started chatting. He'd actually also known me for a very long time. Initially as a part of Sequoia as an investor in Nolarity, and so in that sense he was tracking me as a competitor for one of their portfolio companies. For a brief while, his ex-wife was also working with me as one of my colleagues, etc. So he knows me, and certainly he knows that we had overperformed compared to their portfolio company, and B, after almost a decade, I'm still here, and I'm still kind of gunning to figure out how to make this work. He also told me once that with me, what he really liked was what he saw is what he got. And so these were some of the reasons why I think he chose to back Exotel. Why he chose any company at all, of course, is a no-brainer. So because of COVID, work from home, remote, so engagement technologies, communication technologies naturally are going to play a much larger role. We've all seen how Zoom stocks zoomed. Basically, we were in the same industry. So, from an investor standpoint, it's just great timing. In fact, particularly Exotel, because I think, as you know, investors are in the business of buying cheap and selling high. And so, here's a company backed by a team and a founder who's been at it for a decade in a segment that's obviously going to blow up because of the pandemic. And they also found us at a time frame when our revenues were rock bottom. I told you, right? So my revenues were almost 55% down. So it was, I think, the sweetest deal of the decade. So he came in, and then I needed the money. I told you we just come off a layoff. So I think it was just a complete win-win-win and a brilliant move, in my opinion, from A91. And then I think they got a chunk of company for a lot lesser than what anybody would imagine is the right price. But everybody was okay with it. So I'm still okay with it because we needed the money. So the only good thing I did was that he actually wanted to invest a lot more. So I actually broke it down into two pieces. So I think I saved a little bit of dilution because of that. But nevertheless, that partnership has been fruitful for everyone involved. And I'm actually grateful for them to have come on board. And right now, I think they're the largest shareholders of the.
Once A91 invested, the MEO deal was between the two tranches or after the two tranches?
After the two tranches. So then it turns out that Sachin Bhatia had already spoken to another public company, and then they were about to seal a deal. And then I called him up and I said, "Look, dude, you want to rekindle the conversation?" He saw that I had actually raised only like 40 crores. He's like, "Boss, it's not going to work with 40 crores. Our company is worth a lot more." What I didn't tell him was that I could have raised a lot more, but I didn't for some reasons. I didn't tell him that explicitly. He didn't ask me that question explicitly. So somehow, due to miscommunication, we hung up the phone and then they were about to go their way. But due to stars being aligned my way, the acquiring company frustrated them a little bit. My own charming nature, I think their financial investors, I think, still had a decent opinion about who I am and my capabilities. And then when the time came, when they couldn't bear the frustration anymore, one of their investors called me and said, "Sorry, you were trying to say something." And then it just restarted once again, and then I practically pulled the deal out of the lion's mouth and brought it home. So I would say that I'm actually quite proud of a lot of things that we got the Ameo deal and that we were able to put it together is actually, in my opinion, one of my biggest achievements.
And at that point of time, you were doing like again back to 20 million uh, revenue, and MEO was like 15 million in revenue, right?
Something like that, yeah.
And
Exactly.
together the entire joint entity became 35 million. And how's the path been from that, right, in the middle of the pandemic, doing an acquisition, becoming a $35 million entity, to raising a couple of more rounds, and today being a 60 mil ARR company? uh, Walk us through the journey. Shivku.
As the last calendar year was just the best work of my life. Practically the entire year, there were only two things that were going on in my life. A, I was very, very busy doing a whole bunch of stuff. And B, every day when I used to go to sleep, I always used to think, wow, what sort of a place am I finding myself in? And my mind was just filled with gratitude that I can do the kind of work that I'm doing today. These are the really two emotions that were just going on, very, very busy and full of gratitude. So we actually raised around every quarter of the last calendar year. So we went B1, B2, C, and D. And then we also ended up doing two acquisitions. One in June. The merger with Ameo was in June, and the acquisition of Cogno in November. So even as we were grappling the unfortunate events of the pandemic, my life was actually also extremely hectic and exciting in this manner. So what we now know is that we further on we ended up getting a operator license, and then we are now on our way to actually executing the original vision of bringing public cloud contact center for India. And I would say that customers are actually lapping it up in a big way. So it looks to me that that's a bet that's really working, and I think the fact that that strategic bet is working is what's really bringing the team together. I think everybody's seeing the point of why we are coming together, and so that's, I think, what's really exciting everybody.
And tell us about the capabilities Exotel has right now, because it's far more superior, far more diverse than what you thought that you could build.
Absolutely right. So very soon we will be giving away the name Exotel. We'll rebrand it into something else. We're just waiting for the marketing guy to come in so that we can get that process started. Because it's true that the current scope of Exotel is much larger than much larger than what we originally had. So right now we are on our way to building emerging markets first full stack customer engagement platform. We believe that enterprises want to work with a single vendor for all of their channels, and also want all of these channels deeply integrated into all of their CRMs and systems. They don't have the enterprise bandwidth, engineering bandwidths to put it all together. Most leaders don't want to break their heads to figure out where to download the reports of different things. They don't want vendors to point fingers at each other saying as to who is down. Governments want data localization and more compliance. Users want to interact with a company using multiple channels at multiple points in time. So all of this really just points me to creating the full stack customer engagement play, which I think is very uniquely positioned. It's unlike any other company that is there in the market today. We've actually gone as far to now say that we're getting our own telco license. We'll very soon be able to sell phone numbers. We'll be able to enable WhatsApp on those numbers. We'll be able to give virtual numbers to companies. So all of these are actually, first in the market. No one's really talking about any of this. No one's doing any of this. So I think this is really what's driving most of the excitement and the growth. Like you said, we've gone from about, I don't know, 35 $40 million last year to about 60 million this year, and we anticipate the growth to continue. We'll likely, hopefully, grow at another 70% this year as well. We have access to about 400 large enterprises in the country, and the biggest and the best B2C companies of the country. And many of them are actually really only using one of our services, either the contact center or the voice platform or the SMS platform or the Cogno chatbot. And so we have the opportunity to now sell them uh, a suite of products, voice, both IP and PSTN, messaging, both SMS and WhatsApp, video APIs, enterprise contact center, chatbot, voice bot. So this is the plethora of things, canvas of things that we're currently operating in, and so far it appears as though customers are loving it.
Shivku, yeah, I was saying you also proved naysayers wrong, that a 60 mil ARR company can't be built from India for India, right? Most of your customers uh, are based in India. Okay, can you share the customer split across geographies?
So I think about maybe 70% of our revenues is from India, and the remaining 30%, 10% maybe from the Middle East, 10% from Southeast Asia, and the remaining from the rest of the world. By the way, we think of ourselves as a SaaS company. So this is actually a new terminology that we've come up with. Recently, we came up with it. The first time I heard it was in Bloom Day. I think Sachit Pai from Bloom used that phrase, but actually, um, in my mind, I'm actually building on that phrase a lot more. SaaSter is actually both SaaS and transaction. So when you have recurring revenues and transaction revenues in the same account, and that's a very different business to be in actually compared to just a SaaS business. So many of the rules of thumbs are different, and I believe that one of the reasons why we've been able to grow as big a top line in India is because we are a SaaS company and not just a SaaS company. And so transaction based pricing model enables much faster growth, and in terms of top line, and that's one of the reasons why we've been able to do as much top line as we have.
Shivku, during all this, right? If you have to point out some of the key lessons from your journey, if you had to do it again next time, what would they be that you would carry forward?
So ultimately, I think what I've learned is that it's very important for an entrepreneur to be a charming, social, fun person for people to be with. You want to be a person that great talent wants to come in and work for. That's, I think, that the core of that's the I think that's the core of my learning is to be able to transform myself into a person that is able to be the kind of leader that intelligent people, great talent wants to work with and work for, and is to transform myself to be able to lead them. And unfortunately, many of the stuff that I hear in books actually go literally opposite of what I'm actually doing practically. We've all heard about how an anal person Steve Jobs was, and how you have to be a hardball negotiator to get away with deals and this and that. Actually, none of that works for me. None of that stuff works for me. I don't shout in aisles. I don't push people randomly. I don't create artificial deadlines and things like that. I actually want to make it a lot of pleasure for myself to work in this company, and I want it to be the same way for everybody else as well. I want everybody to have a lot of fun, so that they can realize that the best they can be, and that's the kind of culture and environment that I want to create. And I think that's one very big learning for me. Um, of course, needless to say, culture alone is not going to create a company. So you need to ensure that I develop a sense of what is it that customers actually want, and what the market trends are, and where the market is growing and going. And based on that, whether you're able to improvise your own story and ensure that you put the product and the services that the customer wants to buy in front of them, and just don't get that wrong. I think these are the two big learnings for me. Understand the market and the customer really well, and understand what they want, and create an environment where people have lots of fun working.
And how do you advise about going to understand, market size, market problems, right, and developing solution for it, especially in context of SaaS companies?
There are two ways in which I do it. One is market size. You could use some rules of thumb. So, in my case, how many contact center agents work in the company? How many white collars work are there? What is the per seat rate of each contact center seat? And so you will be able to now arrive at some sort of a TAM number. So this is one way. You can naturally read some papers that people have written, Gartner, Forrester, whatever else, and then you can get some number. You can also now try to find out indirect measures. How big is the e-commerce industry going to look like? How big is BFSI going to become like? How is the broking industry doing? And so you can now use all of these kinds of data, and you can now triangulate some numbers. The idea is to come up with like broad ranges, and use multiple dimensionalities to be able to corroborate whether the numbers are adding up or not. So this is, I think, the top-down way of arriving at TAM, which is not really useful beyond the fact that you want to just ensure that you are working in a space that's at least a couple of $1 billion in size, so that you know that there's enough market to go after. But beyond that, that's not really useful. What is, however, useful is to list down bottoms up, which is to list down all the logos, especially in the B2B enterprise context. Figure out how many companies that there are. There are only going to be a handful, not more than 500 companies that you can sell to, and figure out how much is it that you can sell, and how much money you can make from these companies. How much are they willing to spend? And in my case, it's something like 200 companies, each giving me 10 crores ARR, resulting in about 2,000 crores of top line. So this is not TAM, right? So this is actually like literally the top line that we can get to, if we want to. So I think these are the two numbers that at least I tend to work with. So long as my current numbers are orders of magnitude smaller than the number that I just calculated, then we are in business.
And what are your advices for not to do? Because there are many things I believe that you would remember from your journey, that these are definitely, I'll not do it again.
I'm not sure if that's the way to say it. So I would say that so I think Randy Posh from last lecture said that you always get, whenever you get into an experience, whenever you get into something, and then let's say you don't get what you want, you always get experience from it, right? So either you get what you want, or you get experience, and so I think that's the better way of looking at it. So I would say that mistakes are really the stones, the dents that is going to chisel you into the person that you will become, and that's the process of actually becoming a capable leader. So I would even argue, go ahead and make your mistakes, but at the end of every mistake, just try to ensure that you've learned something, and that's the way to do it.
Thank you so much, Shivku. It's been a fantastic conversation walking the last 10 years of yours and Exotel's journey. I'm getting so fond of it, right? Just imagining what you have been through, the highs and the lows, uh, placing myself there. I hope the audience goes through the same emotion that I have been through in the last 60 minutes.
I'm actually amazed that you got me talking for an hour. I didn't think I'm capable of doing that. I think I appreciate the fact that you prodded me into getting all of these things out of my mouth. I hope everybody enjoys listening to the show.